the more you study the scriptures, the more you realize that dispensationalism is bunk, is garbage. Sorry for dispensationalists listening to this. But you would still leave the bad theology behind, which is legitimate and what everyone should do. But you would still have this naive normative Zionism, right? That you still would care for Israel at the expense of the Palestinians, right?
I would say I would describe it as a passive, uninformed political Zionism. Again, I read the Bible, Israel. I see Israel. No, not even that though, because even when I left dispensationalism, I was like, okay, maybe Romans 11, maybe there's going to be some sort of revival turning to Jesus among Jewish people prior to his second coming, but that has nothing to do with the land of Israel. And they need to turn to Jesus. Like there's nothing about, even when I was in Israel, even then I was like, hey, these Orthodox Jews that are like persecuting Israeli converts to Christianity, like they're not on our side, dude. They need to come to Jesus. But just politically, passively uninformed, it was just kind of like Israel's, they're the good guys, and Palestinians are politically the bad guys. So there was nothing theologically driving it for me for a long time. It was just this, I would say, misinformed, passive, just reception of that kind of narrative.
Yeah. I mean, this is something where it comes to goes down to the heart of the individual. Like, you can not be a Christian Zionist. You don't have to. You're not using Ezekiel or Genesis 12 or Romans 11. By the way, just for context, Romans 11, Paul is talking about, basically he's expressing his own frustration and sadness that so many Jews have not accepted Jesus at the time. And he gave this imagery of the olive tree and the grafting of the wild branches. But he says, until the fulfillment of the Gentiles, something would happen for Jews to basically maybe go back to believe in Christ. And then by doing so, all of Israel will be saved, which is an interesting phenomenon because, like, what is Israel now?
Right.
And there's an interpretation that the Israel he's referring to then are God's people that would include Gentiles. I'm not talking about the specific ethnic Israel, because now there's the tree is Israel, but the tree is Gentile and Jewish.
Yeah.
So
it's a highly disputed passage.
Right. But it's been used effectively by many Christian Zionists to say, there is something special for the Jewish people, obviously, and that's going to happen eventually. So therefore, there's this, we need to focus on that vis-a-vis the Gentile, the non-Jewish people. Right. So we identify anti-Islamic bigotry as an operative kind of impact and really strong way for evangelicals to disallow them or to hinder them from thinking well about this issue. And you are in these circles, like you're very known to be. You have your conference, Exiles in Babylon. You interact with a lot of evangelicals. Just from your experience, what is this? Aside from Islamophobia, what do you think keeps evangelicals distracted or uninterested or even antagonistic to the Palestinian plight?
I think there's several things. Sometimes there might be multiple factors at work, but just to kind of go through a few of them, we've already kind of mentioned, Islamophobia would be one. Number two, Zionism in its various forms. Strong, thought out, argued for theological Zionism. This would be like dispensational seminary professors, people who would want to make a theological argument in that direction. I think most Christians are sort of maybe passively theologically, politically Zionist. Again, they just see Israel in the Bible. They see conflict in the Middle East. They see a country called Israel. It's just like, without even thinking about it, your mind just naturally goes to they must be the good guys, And then the Holocaust, and what a heroic story, there was a land without a people for people without a land.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm saying that tongue in cheek. So you have that kind of passive, like, political Zionism. We've kind of mentioned, I think racism can be part of it. It doesn't have to be, but it certainly can be. I also think here's two, let me give three more. Misinformation / propaganda and the inability or confusion over how to sort it all out. And here, there's some people that just are actively choosing to believe narratives they want to believe. And I think that's an ethical problem. That's not morally neutral. Then there's people that I think in good faith, they're not on the news all the time. Like I've got a good friend. He doesn't have social media. He's not on the news a lot, but he'll kind of hear, it's all Hamas's fault, and he'll hear the talking points on one side. Then he'll hear another side, and he kind of like, I don't. People I respect say this. Other people I respect say this. I look and I see tragedy, and it's kind of like, well, we just need Jesus to come back. That's the solution. I can't sort it all out. I have a heart for that person. Now, I feel like this is an important enough issue to carve out time to do some of the work to figure this out, not just kind of throw up your arms and plead ignorance. But I think that is a decent portion of evangelicals. They just don't know what narrative to believe. And, I'll listen to debates now by people giving those two narratives. And if I wasn't informed, the other, I would say, propaganda narrative that's very pro-Israel, it can sound convincing. Some of the people, their mannerisms, their voice, they're confident, they're strong. They'll say things that are just flat out untrue, but they say them with confidence. And if you haven't done the work, you hear that, I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. The UN is the problem. They're letting all this food rot out, and not going in. And if Hamas would just give up the hostages, there would be peace. There's no partner for peace in the Middle East. Look, and then they'll start citing, Oslo and these things and just totally making stuff up. And like, gosh, yeah, I guess Hamas is the problem. We got to get rid of Hamas. That's the root issue, So there's that. I also, here's another thing and this kind of plays into it. There's a fear among conservative evangelicals of being politically liberal. I felt this in my bones for 25 years. Well, up until I was like maybe 30 years old, where to be a true Bible-believing Christian was so intertwined with politically conservative values. Yeah, and interesting enough, anti-abortion, pro-military,
Yeah, immigration,
pro-death penalty, and all these things, especially in the 1980s. Growing up in the 80s under the moral majority in America, it's, Daniel, you have to appreciate how powerful and how absorbed any conservative Christian was in just the air, just what was in the air. I remember hearing about a professor at my college, public college, and I heard that he's a Christian. I was like, oh, that's so exciting. And then someone said, but he's a pacifist. I'm like, oh, so he can't. Okay, so he can't be a Christian, because to be a Christian is to be militarist. I literally remember thinking that. I was so bummed. I was like, oh, I really want to talk to him, but now he's an atheist, and because he's a pacifist. Just these categories are so merged together. So, but that for a lot of evangelicals today that are committed to conservative political values, they see the political left speaking up for the Palestinians. And so they're like, oh, that must be a left-wing thing. Well, I'm not for, transing the kids. I'm not for men and women's bathrooms. I'm not for abortion. I'm not for, and they go down the checklist of all these liberal values or whatever. And they're like, well, if I'm pro-Palestinian, that means I'm changing sides to this liberal side. I see that so much in how Christians think through this issue. It's like there's this psychological wall that just prevents them from seeing it another way, because they just think they have to change political teams or whatever. Lastly, I think it's an idolatry of militarism and empire. American evangelical Christians, again, who grew up in the 80s and 90s, we think military might extending the American dream across the globe, like being an empire because we're the good people, we're the Christian nation, and we need to exert military force to destroy the bad people and make sure we destroy all terrorists, and if some civilians get killed in the process, well, that's just collateral damage as a price to pay. It's just this militaristic spirit that, again, it took me several years to kind of just look at that and say, this is not just wrong. This is so directly contrary to the gospel. The Bible talks a lot about militarism and and empire, and it is consistently opposed to it. Even in the Old Testament, where there's some violence, it's still anti-militarism, which in my book on nonviolence, I talk about that. And the book of Revelation and Jesus and the Gospels, the whole thing, it just runs counter to the gospel. And once I was able to pull up my own militaristic spirit and love for empire by the theological roots, it's like the scales came off. And I'm like, oh, my word. But then I look around, I'm like, oh, these roots are so deep in the American evangelical spirit.
Did you like this video? Make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support the work we're doing here at the podcast, go over to patreon.com/acrossthedivide. Your support keeps us going. Thank you, friends.